I'm 60 now, retired. No helmet, no radio, just a fire crackling beside me, and a mug of coffee hot enough to keep the ghosts quiet. But some nights, the war still knocks. Denver was buried in a snowstorm when I saw her, under a street lamp like a bad omen in fur. A German shepherd, 5 years old, soaked, shaking, eyes locked on mine like she'd already read my file. She didn't bark, didn't bare teeth. She waited, then turned and took 3 steps into the dark, looked back once. I should have stayed inside. That's what civilians do. But SEALs? We don't ignore a silent distress call. Then I heard it. Thin, desperate. A puppy crying from underground. I grabbed my coat, set the mug down, and followed her into an abandoned worksite. Because out there, one wrong step on ice, and the storm doesn't just kill you, it erases you. Snow fell sideways over Denver, turning streetlights into blurred halos, and the world into a quiet, white siege. The fire in my living room snapped and sighed like it had opinions. I sat close enough to feel the heat on my shins, far enough to keep my hands steady. A plain ceramic mug warmed my palms. Black coffee, no sugar. The way I'd learned to drink it when sleep came in short, suspicious intervals. Name's Jack Miller, 60 years old, white guy, weathered like a fence post left out too long. My hair used to be a dark, obedient thing. Now it's mostly gray, cropped tight because old habits don't retire just because you do. My face is all edges, cheekbones sharp, jaw squared off, softened only by a beard I keep trimmed short, not stylish. Practical, the kind of beard you grow when you stop caring about mirrors but still care about being ready. People around here know me as the quiet man on the cul-de-sac, the one who shovels his own driveway before dawn, the one who never asks for help, the one who nods back but doesn't linger in conversation. They don't know why I keep my curtains half open at night. I used to be Navy SEAL, not the movie version, the real one. Long stretches of boredom broken by moments that last half a minute and follow you for 30 years. You learn to read silence. You learn to hear trouble before it shows its face. You learn to sleep with one ear awake and one hand always a little too close to something heavy. I retired. Sure. Turned in the gear. Signed the papers. Moved inland like a man trying to convince himself mountains are safer than oceans. But war doesn't always leave when you do. That night, the storm hit with the kind of confidence only weather has. Wind rattled the windows, pushing snow against the glass like 100 impatient fingers. The house groaned in its wooden bones. I could have stayed in my chair, watched the flames dance, let the coffee and the warmth build a small barricade between me and the world. That's what civilians do. My eyes drifted to the front door anyway, because my body still believed bad things happen when you stop paying attention. Then I heard it. Not loud, not dramatic, just a sound threaded into the wind. Easy to miss if you didn't know how to listen. A rough, strained whine, like pain caught in a throat too tired to scream. It wasn't human. Still, my spine tightened the same way it used to when a radio crackled with the wrong kind of silence after a call sign. I set the mug down slowly. The fire popped. The house settled. For a second, I argued with myself, an old man's argument, worn smooth from repetition. It's a storm. It's an animal. Someone else will handle it. But the other voice, the one that never cared about comfort, answered back. If someone else was going to handle it, you wouldn't be hearing it. I pulled on my coat. Dark wool. Thick. Heavy. My boots were by the door like they'd been waiting for this conversation. I didn't grab a weapon. Colorado isn't Kandahar. But I did take my flashlight, the kind with a hard metal body, bright enough to slice the night in half. The porch light washed the front steps in pale yellow. Snow spun in the beam like ash. When I opened the door, cold air slapped me across the face. Sharp, clean, mean. I stepped out and scanned the street. Empty. Then the sound came again, closer now, more desperate. It didn't belong to the wind. It belonged to something alive that didn't want to die. I started toward the sidewalk, boots crunching through fresh powder. My breath steamed in front of me like a warning. That's when I saw her. Under the street lamp at the corner, a shape stood half in shadow, half in light. Big dog, broad chest, straight back, a coat the color of wet earth and old gold, darkened by snowmelt. She looked like she'd been sculpted for work. Strong lines, alert posture. But right now she was trembling hard enough to make her ribs show. She was a German shepherd, traditional build, not the overbred, sloped kind. About 5 years old, if my eyes still work the way I trusted them to. Her muzzle was long and intelligent, sprinkled with flecks of frost. One ear had a small notch near the tip, an old tear, healed, clean. The kind that says she'd been in a scrape and walked away. Her eyes were the part that stopped me. Not wild, not aggressive, not the glassy fear of a stray ready to bolt. Her eyes were steady, brown, warm, and locked on mine like she'd picked me out of the storm on purpose. She didn't bark. She didn't growl. She just stood there, soaked and shaking, and stared at me the way a person stares when they've run out of time for politeness. I held my hands low, palms open, slow movements, respect. "Hey," I said, voice quiet so I wouldn't make it worse. "Easy, girl." She took one step forward, then froze. Her paws sunk into the snow. She swallowed, throat working like it hurt. A soft whimper slipped out of her, raw and pleading. And in that single sound, I heard the whole story of a mother trying to keep the world from taking something she wasn't ready to lose. My chest tightened in a place armor used to cover. I wasn't proud of how fast my mind went tactical. I scanned for a collar. There wasn't one. No tag, no leash, no human footprints nearby except my own. The dog glanced over her shoulder, toward the dark end of the street where the storm swallowed everything beyond a few yards. Then she looked back at me, and she did something I didn't expect. She turned and trotted away 3 steps, stopped, and looked back again, not running, leading, a signal as clear as a hand gesture in a silent room. "Come. Now." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "You're kidding me," I muttered, mostly to myself. The dog, Daisy, I'd call her later, because she'd earned a name that felt gentle, didn't wait for permission. She took another few steps, pausing again, eyes cutting back to check if I was following. The wind shoved snow into my face. The cold gnawed at my ears. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a branch snapped like a bone. I should have turned around, gone back inside, put my mug back in my hands, and let the fire tell me comforting lies. But those eyes, they weren't asking for food. They were asking for a rescue. And the worst part was, I understood her. I started walking. Daisy moved ahead, just far enough to keep me committed, not far enough to lose me. Every few steps she'd pause, ears tilted, listening, like she was monitoring a danger I couldn't see. As we reached the corner, the street lamp behind us faded into the blur of snow. The neighborhood thinned. Houses gave way to a stretch of undeveloped land, a place the city hadn't bothered to tame yet. Fences half buried, construction signs bent by wind, a gap where the world felt less human. Daisy stopped again, turning her head toward that darkness. Then she let out the smallest sound, barely more than breath, and carried on. I tightened my grip on the flashlight and followed. Because some missions don't come with orders. They come with a mother's plea in the shape of a shaking dog under a streetlight. And once you've heard that kind of call, you don't sleep through it. Led into the kill zone. The dark beyond the neighborhood felt unfinished, like the city had started building something and then lost interest. Snow piled against sagging chain-link fences. A half-buried "no trespassing" sign leaned at an angle, its red letters washed pale by ice. Somewhere ahead, the faint metallic sigh of an old rail line cut through the wind. Denver's forgotten edge, where the streetlights gave up and the storm took over. Daisy moved with purpose. Not fast, not frantic. Controlled, like she was rationing her fear so it wouldn't waste her strength. Every 10 yards, she'd stop, turn her head, and look back at me with those steady brown eyes. Not pleading now, checking. I followed, boots slipping on hidden patches of ice, my flashlight being jittered across snowdrifts, dead weeds, broken boards half buried like bones. The cold knifed through my coat seams. My lungs burned clean with every breath, the kind of burn that reminded me of night swims and long runs with too much weight on my back. I should have been inside, but the truth was, part of me felt clearer out here. In the war, uncertainty was a luxury. You moved because you had to. You decided fast. You didn't get to sit by a fire and think about how tired you were. Out here, in a storm that didn't care about age or metals, my mind slipped into that old gear. Daisy turned sharply down a slope where the snow looked untouched. No human tracks, no tire marks, just wind-sculpted drifts and the occasional jagged line where grass clawed through. She paused at the top of the incline, ears perked, and let out a low whine that vibrated in her chest. I angled the flashlight down. That's when I saw it. A broad mouth of darkness in the earth, framed by concrete and rusted rebar. An old drainage channel that ran beneath a half-finished construction site. The kind of place water was meant to escape through. The kind of place living things shouldn't be. The site itself was a graveyard of plans. Stacks of warped plywood. A yellow excavator parked like a sleeping animal, its arm raised as if caught mid-gesture. Steel beams half sunk in snow. Tarps flapping like torn flags. And above it all, the wind tore across open space with nothing to soften it. Daisy stood at the edge, front paws planted wide, her whole body trembling, not from cold now, but from what she knew was waiting below. Then the sound came again, a thin, broken whimper from inside that black throat. Not one cry. Two. My stomach tightened. I swept the flashlight beam into the opening. The light only reached a few feet before the dark swallowed it. Moist air drifted out, colder than the surface, carrying the faint smell of mud and metal and something animal. Warm life trapped where it didn't belong. Daisy looked at me once more. This time, her eyes didn't say, "Follow me," they said, "Please don't fail." I crouched near the opening and tested the concrete lip with my gloved hand. Ice slicked the surface. One slip and you drop into whatever waited below. The drainage channel angled downward, steep enough to break bones, shallow enough to leave you alive and hurting while the cold finished the job. My mind did its old, ruthless math. Visibility, bad. Footing, worse. Temperature, lethal with time. And I was alone. The thought didn't scare me the way it should have. What scared me was the idea of walking away and hearing those cries in my sleep. Daisy made a small, impatient sound and nudged my thigh with her nose, quick, firm, like a shove from a teammate. "Yeah," I muttered. "Okay." I scanned the site for anything useful. Near the fence line, half buried in snow, lay a coil of nylon rope, construction grade, thick enough to hold weight, stiff with ice. I yanked it free, shaking snow from it, hands moving on instinct, the kind of instinct you earn in places where one bad knot means a body bag. I looped the rope around a rusted steel post and cinched it tight, tested it twice. The post groaned, but held. Daisy watched every movement like she understood the language of preparation. "You've done this before," I said softly, not sure if I meant her or myself. Her ears twitched at my voice, but she didn't look away from the opening. Her tail hung low, still. All focus. I anchored the rope around my waist the way I'd done 100 times with different gear and different stakes. My hands were slower than they used to be. Age is a thief, even for men who once believed they were steel. But the technique was the same. Breath, Grip. Weight check. The wind slammed into my back, urging me to reconsider. I shone the flashlight down again. The cries came, weak, strained. Like the sound had to fight its way out. I swallowed hard. My throat felt tight the way it did right before a dive, when the body realizes you're about to do something it can't practice safely. Daisy stepped closer to the lip, peered down, and released a low, aching whine. Not loud enough to echo, just a mother's voice, kept controlled because panic wouldn't save anyone. Then she turned to me and, for the first time since I'd seen her, she pressed her side against my leg. Not affection, trust. It hit me harder than the cold. I've lived through the kind of loyalty men write songs about, and still, this simple act from a dog who should have feared me felt like a heavier oath than any I'd taken in uniform. I moved to the edge and sat, legs dangling into nothing. The darkness below breathed. I lowered my boots until they touched the slanted concrete, slick with ice. The rope tightened around my waist. My flashlight beam quivered as my gloved hand adjusted grip. "Stay," I told Daisy, though I knew she wouldn't go anywhere. Her head dipped once, as if acknowledging an order. I eased down, inch by inch, boots searching for traction. The cold inside the channel was different, damp, biting, intimate. Snow above muffled the storm's roar until the world shrank to rope tension, flashlight glare, and those fragile cries guiding me deeper. My shoulder brushed the concrete wall, sending a shower of frost into my collar. I held my breath, kept descending. Halfway down, the beam caught something, claw marks on the concrete, fresh and frantic. Daisy had tried to get in, again and again, until she'd realized she couldn't. The cries grew louder. Then the flashlight swept across the bottom. Two small shapes huddled in a shallow pocket where water had carved out a depression. Puppies. German Shepherd pups, maybe 6 weeks old. Their fur was dark, damp, stuck to their thin bodies. One trembled violently, legs splayed awkwardly. The other lay too still, only a faint rise in its chest, proving it hadn't given up. My heart kicked hard against my ribs. Above me, Daisy's silhouette hovered at the opening like a guardian at the gate. And down here, in the wet cold and the stink of rust, the real mission finally revealed itself. I tightened my grip on the rope. "Hang on," I whispered, voice low and steady, like a promise meant for all three of them. Because in this kind of storm, hope wasn't a feeling. It was a decision. The price of trust. The drainage channel was colder than the surface world, as if the storm had poured its worst into this concrete throat and left it there to fester. My boots slid a fraction on the slanted wall, and the rope bit into my waist, tight enough to remind me that gravity was patient and undefeated. Water ran in thin sheets along the bottom, dark and sluggish, carrying the sour smell of rusted metal and wet earth. I angled the flashlight down, forcing the beam to hold steady, and saw the puppies again. Two small bodies wedged in a shallow pocket where the concrete dipped like a cruel cradle. One pup trembled so hard his paws tapped the ground in a helpless rhythm. The other lay on his side, breathing shallow, his ribs fluttering under damp fur like he was trying to remember how to live. I moved slowly, because haste is how men die in the dark. My left hand kept tension on the rope. My right hand held the flashlight, and I tucked my elbow tight to control the shake in my shoulder. I'd carried wounded teammates through places worse than this, but the math was always the same. A slick surface, a narrow margin, and the body's stubborn refusal to stay calm when something small is suffering. Above me, Daisy's silhouette stayed fixed at the mouth of the channel. Her ears were forward, her chest low. Every muscle wound tight. She let out a short bark, sharp, not aggressive, more like an alarm. It echoed down the pipe and came back distorted, like the place was mocking her. "Easy," I said, not to her, Not to me, just to the moment. I see them. The pup that was shaking lifted his head, eyes barely open, and made a thin sound like a question. His coat was the dark sable of a traditional shepherd, but the color was dulled by water. He had a white star on his chest no bigger than a quarter, a tiny mark of individuality that felt unfairly precious down here. The weaker pup had a narrower face, a softer muzzle, and his ears, still too young to stand, lay flat against his head. His lips were tinged pale, his paws cold-looking even in the flashlight beam. 6 weeks, maybe. Old enough to follow their mother, too young to survive a night like this. My knee touched the wet concrete and sent a chill straight through the joint. I didn't let it show on my face. Pain is a liar in situations like this. It tells you to hurry, and hurrying is what makes you fall. I reached for the shaking pup first because he was still fighting. The moment my gloved fingers brushed his scruff, he flinched, then leaned into my hand like he'd been waiting for permission to trust. I slid my palm under his belly and lifted him gently. He was lighter than my winter coat. He smelled like mud, cold milk, and fear. The rope creaked as I shifted my weight, and the channel answered with a low groan somewhere above. A metal cable swung loose in the wind, tapping the concrete with a hollow clink that made my nerves sit up. Daisy barked again, louder this time. A warning. I froze and swung my flashlight upward. The beam caught the underside of the construction site, a jagged skeleton of beams and boards half buried in snow, a sheet of corrugated tin, loose, hinged on nothing, shuddered as the wind found it. For a second it held, vibrating like a drawn blade. Then the storm shoved harder. The tin tore free with a shriek and dropped into the mouth of the channel. There's a moment in every near-death that feels absurdly slow. You see the thing falling. You understand exactly what it will do. And your body, if it's been trained, if it's been humbled enough times, moves before your mind finishes praying. I snapped my shoulder into the wall and rolled, dragging the puppy with me. The tin slammed down where my head had been, exploding icy water up the channel in a violent spray. The impact rang through the concrete like a gunshot. A sharp edge kissed my coat sleeve and tore it open, just missing skin. The puppy yelped, then went rigid, eyes wide. My heart hammered once, hard, and then steadied the way it always had when something almost ended. Above, Daisy's bark turned into a strained, broken sound that wasn't anger. It was terror. She had done the one thing a mother in nature hates to do. She had entrusted her young to a stranger, and the storm had tried to punish her for it. "It's okay," I said, louder now so she'd hear it. My voice came out rough, older than I felt by the fire. "We're okay." But the channel didn't care. Water was rising. Not fast yet, but enough to change the rules. Meltwater and runoff, funneling down from the street, finding the lowest point, like all bad things do. It slid around my boots and crept toward the pup's pocket. I looked at the weaker pup, still on his side, breathing shallow. His eyes were half-lidded, not from peace, from exhaustion. I could not carry both at once safely. Not with the rope, not with my balance already compromised, not with that tin now blocking part of the slope behind me. In my head, the old seal voice spoke with brutal clarity. Prioritize. Adapt. Execute. In my chest, something softer answered. They're babies. Daisy's silhouette shifted. She didn't jump down, couldn't, but she leaned in, nose over the edge, and whined so low it vibrated the air. Not a command, not a demand, a mother's plea, stripped to bone. I set the shaking pup down behind my knee where he'd be sheltered by my body and the wall. He immediately pressed against my leg, clinging. My gloved fingers moved to the weaker pup's chest. His fur was slick and cold. I rubbed in small circles, trying to coax warmth, trying to coax breath. "Come on," I murmured. "Stay with me." His eyelids fluttered. A faint sound escaped him, almost nothing. but it was effort, and effort was life. I needed a carrier, a wrap, anything. My gaze flicked to the tin sheet that had almost killed me. One corner was bent upward like a crude ramp. My knife, small, legal, old habit, came out. I sliced a long strip from the lining of my torn sleeve. Then another. The fabric was thick wool, not ideal, but it was mine. And I could afford to lose it more than they could afford to lose heat. I looped the fabric under the weaker pup, making a sling, tying it off with quick knots my fingers remembered even when my joints complained. The pup's head lolled, then steadied against my wrist. His body was limp, but his breathing, thin as it was, continued. The shaking pup watched me with eyes that were too serious for something that small. He seemed to understand that this wasn't just rescue. This was a test. Could a human be steady when the world turned cruel? "All right," I whispered, "one at a time. But we're not leaving anyone." Above, Daisy's barks softened into short, urgent huffs. Her tail wasn't wagging. She wasn't relieved yet. She was holding her breath along with me. I shifted my stance, tightened the rope, and prepared to climb, one puppy strapped to me, the other pressed close, and a storm above that had already tried to take my head as a down payment. Trust, I realized, wasn't a gift. It was a wager. And down here, in the dark and the cold, I was determined not to let Daisy lose. The seal's last fight. The rope hummed against my waist as I started the climb, and the drainage channel seemed to tighten around me, like it didn't want to let anything leave. The puppy in the sling, weak, limp, breathing like a candle fighting wind, was pressed against my chest under my coat, stealing what heat it could from an old body that had been asked for too much in one lifetime. The other pup, the fighter with the little white star on his chest, scrabbled against my boot and whined, confused and terrified, but still alive enough to complain about it. I didn't blame him. Cold does that. It turns the world into a question with no good answers. Above, Daisy's outline hovered at the mouth of the channel, head low, ears forward, every inch of her screaming readiness without a single aggressive move. She was a mother on the edge of a cliff, and I was the stranger she had decided, against instinct, against nature, was worth the gamble. I tested the slope with my boots and pulled on the rope hand over hand, letting my legs do as much as they could. The concrete was slick with a film of ice and mud, and my soles slipped half an inch with each push. My forearms burned. My shoulder, old injury from a training fall decades ago, lit up with sharp, familiar pain. The kind that tries to make you angry so you stop thinking clearly. I kept breathing through it, slow, measured, like I was back on a ladder in black water, carrying something that mattered more than comfort. Then the water changed its voice. It went from a lazy trickle to a steady rush, a sound like someone pouring gravel into the channel. My flashlight beam caught the surface at the bottom, and I saw it rising, swallowing the depression where the pups had been trapped. Runoff from the streets above, snowmelt mixed with sludge, funneling into the low ground with cruel efficiency. The storm had found a second way to kill us. "Not today," I muttered. Not as bravado, more like a reminder to my own hands. I made it to a shallow ledge where the wall angled out, a place just wide enough to kneel without sliding. I looked down. The water was already past my ankle line from earlier. Another minute and it would be at my knees. Another minute after that, and climbing would turn into swimming. And swimming with puppies in freezing runoff is the kind of headline that never makes it past the morgue. I had to move the pups up, one at a time, and I had to do it fast, without rushing. Rushing is how you drop what you promised to save. I tightened the sling knot and shifted the weak pup higher against my chest. His head lolled once, then nestled into the warmth like he understood surrender. I couldn't afford him surrendering. I angled my body, braced my boots, and reached down for the stronger pup. He squirmed the moment I touched him, little teeth flashing in a useless snap. Not aggression, fear. His eyes were bright, too bright, and his body shook in bursts. He was the kind of pup who would grow into a dog that argued with the world. I respected that. Yeah, I whispered. I don't like this either. I scooped him with my left arm and hugged him to my ribs, pinning his paws gently so he wouldn't kick free. His heart hammered against my jacket like a tiny drum. For a second, I had both of them, one strapped to me, one clutched to my side. And the weight wasn't heavy in pounds. It was heavy in responsibility. I climbed again. The rope groaned. Mud slicked my boots. The channel wall was a cold, wet knife against my palms. I could feel my fingers losing fine sensation, that early numbness that makes you clumsy and confident at the same time. The storm above howled through the opening, and snow dusted down into the channel like flour. Daisy barked, a short, sharp sound, then whined, her voice cracking on the edge of panic. I glanced up and saw why. The tin sheet that had fallen earlier hadn't settled harmlessly. It had shifted in the current, scraping against the slope like a blade being sharpened. Water shoved it, and it rocked, threatening to slide further and clip the rope or my legs. A stupid piece of metal, a random hazard, the kind of thing that kills people who survive everything else. I moved my weight higher, away from it, and the mud answered by trying to steal my footing. My right boot slipped, and for half a heartbeat my body dropped. Rope, snapping taut. The jolt drove pain through my lower back. The stronger pup yelped, claws raking my coat. The weak pup in the sling made no sound, just a faint exhale that felt like it might be his last. My jaw clenched so hard my teeth hurt. Above me, Daisy's silhouette lunged forward, paws scraping on the concrete lip. She couldn't come down, but she could reach. Her teeth caught the edge of my coat, not my skin. Not the pup, just fabric. A firm grip, a tug. It was absurd. A dog trying to haul a grown man out of a drainage channel like she was dragging a wounded teammate behind cover. Humor flickered in my brain, sharp and strange, because it was either laugh or break. "You've got jokes," I rasped, voice strained. "You know that." Daisy pulled again, shoulders bunching, back legs braced, tail stiff. She wasn't strong enough to lift me, not fully. But she didn't need to. She gave me momentum. 1 extra inch, 1 extra heartbeat of leverage. In the military, that's sometimes the only difference between almost and alive. I drove my knees upward, dug my boots into a rough patch of concrete, and climbed hard. My hands found the lip. Daisy's breath steamed against my face as she leaned in, still gripping my coat like she refused to let go of her bargain. Snow stung my eyes. The wind tried to peel me away. I pulled anyway, body remembering how to fight when it was too tired to be heroic. Then I was up. I rolled onto the surface, gasping. The pups pressed to me like stolen treasure. The storm hit my face full force, cold and loud, but the open air felt like mercy compared to the channel's damp death. Daisy was on me immediately, circling tight, nose shoved into my coat where the sling was hidden, sniffing with frantic precision, her ears pinned back, her eyes wide, every inch of her asking, "Are they real? Are they breathing?" The stronger pup squirmed free enough to squeak, and Daisy's whole body sagged for a split second. Relief, raw and shaky. Then she did something so ridiculously tender, it almost made me angry at the universe for making it necessary. She licked my cheek, fast and urgent, like she was checking I hadn't disappeared too. I spat a laugh that came out more like a cough. Back when I was a SEAL, I wheezed. Nobody ever thanked me by licking my face. Daisy huffed, offended, then pressed her forehead to my knee as if to say the rules were different now. I shrugged out of my coat with stiff fingers and wrapped it around the pups, making a bundle on the snow. The weak one's breathing was still thin, but there, still there. I rubbed his side through the fabric, keeping rhythm like a metronome. like I could drum life back into him by refusing to stop. The storm kept raging, the construction site still a mess of shadows and danger. But we were out. We had air. We had a chance. Daisy stood over the bundle like a living shield, head lowered, eyes locked on the dark opening behind us as if daring it to try again. And for the first time that night, I believed we might actually win, not because I was tough, because a mother had decided hope was worth dragging out of the ground with her own teeth. Home. At last. And the promise that came late. The drive to the clinic felt longer than it was, because time stretches when life is shivering in your hands. I wrapped the puppies in my coat and held the bundle against my chest like contraband warmth. The weak one, tucked closest to my heartbeat. Daisy ran beside me until I made it to my truck, her paws punching deep into the snow with every step, her breath coming out in frantic white bursts. Up close, in the headlights, she looked even more like the working line shepherd she was meant to be. Broad skull, intelligent brow, a scar-faint notch in one ear, and a coat that would have shown mahogany in sunlight if the storm hadn't soaked it flat. Her eyes never left the bundle, not once. I opened the passenger door and patted the seat. Up. She hesitated, one glance at me, one glance at her pups, then hopped in with stiff precision, curling around the coat like a living wall. I slid into the driver's seat and the heater roared to life with all the enthusiasm of a machine that didn't understand what was at stake. My hands trembled on the wheel, not from fear now, but from the leftover adrenaline that always arrives late, like an apology. I drove with the same controlled aggression I used to save time offshore. Steady speed, eyes scanning, never trusting a slick intersection. The storm made the world small, but the GPS didn't care. It led me to a low brick building with a glowing sign that read, "Front Range Animal Emergency." Inside, the air hit us like a different planet. Warm, disinfected, bright. The lobby smelled of antiseptic and wet fur and human worry. Daisy balked at the threshold, nails scraping tile, body tense as a drawn bow. Animals don't like unknown rooms, and neither do seals, if we're being honest. I carried the pups in and set them carefully on a folded blanket near the reception desk. A woman came out from behind the counter with the practiced urgency of someone who has learned to run toward panic without wearing it on her face. Her name tag read, Emily Carter. She looked mid-30s. Slim but sturdy in the shoulders, the kind of build that came from lifting anxious animals and refusing to complain about it. Her hair was chestnut brown, tied back in a messy bun with loose strands escaping. Battlefield chic for people who work under fluorescent lights at 2 a.m. Her skin was fair, with a dusting of freckles across the nose, and her eyes, gray-green, were sharp and kind at the same time. Like she could soothe a trembling dog and still tell you the truth when you didn't want it. "What happened?" she asked. Already crouching, already reaching with careful hands. "Drainage channel," I said. "2 pups, one's fading. I didn't add the rest. Storm, tin sheet, rope. Daisy's teeth on my coat, because words felt clumsy compared to the urgency in the room. Emily's fingers checked gums. Chest rise. Temperature with a small, swift touch. Her mouth tightened, not in fear, but in concentration. "Okay," she said, voice level as steel. "We're going to warm them first. Hypothermia kills quietly." She glanced at Daisy, who stood rigid 2 steps behind me, hackles half raised, not to threaten, but to brace. Emily didn't flinch. She turned her body sideways, non-confrontational, and spoke softly. "Hey, Mama. You did good. Let us help." Another figure appeared from a doorway, a man in scrubs with a tired face and a beard that had given up on being neat sometime last week. Doctor. Mark Reynolds, late 40s, tall and narrow-shouldered, with deep lines at the corners of his mouth that suggested years of bad nights and hard calls. His hair was salt and pepper, thinning at the crown, and his eyes held the weary steadiness of someone who has seen both miracles and the moments where miracles don't show up. He took one look at the pups and moved with quiet authority. "Heat packs, oxygen, fluids," he said. His tone wasn't dramatic. It was the tone of a man who knew panic wastes seconds. Emily nodded and swept the pups away on the blanket like they were fragile evidence. Daisy whining, claws skittering on tile. I caught her gently by the collar area. There was no collar, just thick fur, and held her back with my forearm. "Daisy," I said without thinking, the name landing in the air like it had always belonged to her. She startled, then stared toward the back hallway where her pups disappeared. Her whole body shook, but she didn't snap. She trusted me in the channel. Now she had to trust strangers in bright rooms. That is a harder trust. Emily returned with a slip lead and offered it to me, not ordering. "Would you walk her with me into an exam room?" she asked. "She'll do." I took the lead and followed. Daisy pressed against my leg like a shadow with a heartbeat. Clean. Too bright. Daisy paced, nails clicking, then finally sat when I sat, mirroring me like a soldier mirrors a squad leader. "Doctor." Reynolds came in, listened to her lungs, checked her hydration, noted the old ear notch, the wear on her teeth that spoke of adult years spent working and surviving. "She's exhausted," he said, "but she's got a strong heart." His eyes shifted to me. "You brought them in fast. That matters." I nodded. Because praise is complicated when you've lived through times where saving one life meant losing another. The pups were in the back under warming blankets, receiving oxygen and fluids. Minutes passed like hours. Daisy's ears tracked every footstep in the hallway. Twice she stood and whined, and twice I rested my hand on her shoulder. Firm, steady, until she sat again. My own hands smelled like wet dog and rust and old rope, I realized, with a strange hollowness that I hadn't finished my coffee. The thought was almost funny. The way normal life tries to insert itself into moments that aren't normal, after what felt like a lifetime. Emily stepped back into the room. Her shoulders loosened the tiniest amount. "The stronger one is stabilizing," she said. "The weaker one, he's still fighting, but his temperature is coming up." Daisy made a sound that was half sob, half sigh, and pushed her head into Emily's hip in a gesture so unexpected it made Emily's face soften. "Good girl," Emily whispered, and scratched behind Daisy's ear. "Careful of the notch." Daisy let it happen. That alone felt like a sunrise. Weeks passed, and the storm became a story people told with a laugh. Like weather always turns dangerous memories into trivia. The puppies grew rounder, louder, full of that fearless chaos young animals are born with. The one with the white star became a bold little menace, chewing shoelaces and stealing socks like it was an elite operation. The weaker one, once he recovered, turned clingy and gentle. Following whoever fed him like devotion was his natural language. Emily, it turned out, didn't just work nights at the clinic. She lived alone in a small apartment above a bakery, and she laughed with her whole face when the pups tumbled over each other. She adopted the gentler pup, naming him Milo, because she said he looked like a Milo the moment he sighed in her arms. The other pup went to my neighbors, the Johnsons, a warm, ordinary family with ordinary kindness. Tom Johnson was a broad-shouldered man in his early 40s with a soft belly that said he enjoyed barbecues, and a beard that made him look friendlier than he probably intended. His wife, Rachel, had honey blonde hair cut to her chin and the calm demeanor of someone who could organize chaos into something livable. They had a teenage daughter, Lily, all long limbs and shy smiles, who looked at the bold pup like he was the first bright thing she'd felt in months. They named him Ranger because he already acted like he owned the backyard. As for Daisy, she came home with me, not immediately. I tried to tell myself I was just fostering, That's the lie men like me use when we're afraid of loving something we can't control. But Daisy chose my porch as if it had been her destination all along. She learned my routines fast. She sat beside my chair by the fire, head on my boot, eyes half closed but always listening. I registered her officially, because a mother who walks into a storm to save her babies deserves paperwork that says she belongs somewhere safe. On the forms, under owner, I wrote my name. Under pet name, I wrote Daisy Miller, not because I wanted to own her, but because I wanted the world to recognize her as family. One afternoon, when the snow finally melted and sunlight returned like forgiveness, I sat on the porch steps with a mug of coffee steaming in my hands. Daisy lay beside me, her body relaxed for the first time. Paws stretched toward the warmth. Across the street, I heard the Johnsons laughing as Ranger chased Lily in circles, a blur of joy. My phone buzzed with a photo from Emily. Milo asleep on his back, paws in the air, perfectly safe. I stared out at the wet, shining street and felt something shift inside me. Something I hadn't known was still capable of moving. For years, my heart had been a guarded perimeter, necessary, efficient, lonely. But there, with Daisy breathing beside me, and the world thawing one day at a time, the perimeter loosened. I realized the truth that came too late for a lot of my friends. Sometimes you don't save the world. Sometimes you save one trembling life. And that single act pulls you, quietly, stubbornly, back from your own darkness. Daisy lifted her head, looked up at me, and in her eyes I saw no battlefield, just home. That night in the Denver snowstorm, I thought I was saving a mother dog and her 2 pups, but later, quiet again. Sitting by the fire, I understood something else. Sometimes a miracle doesn't fall from the sky like a spotlight. Sometimes it comes as a soft, almost missable call. The kind you only hear if you're willing to stop, listen, and step outside. I've been to places where mercy feels like a myth, and yet, down in that freezing drainage channel, I saw what I can only call the hand of God. Not because He did the work for me, but because He put the right life in front of my door, on the right night, at the right moment, to remind me that a heart can still come back to life. If you're worn down by everyday life, bills, sickness, loneliness, heavy news, remember this: God often sends miracles through small things. A phone call you keep putting off, a neighbor you almost ignore, an animal that needs help, a simple kindness you think won't matter. But those small moments can be God whispering, you still have purpose. You can still bring light to someone's dark. If this story touched you, please share it so someone who's struggling can borrow a little hope. Comment a prayer for Daisy, for Milo, for Ranger, and for every creature out there waiting for one good hand. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe and turn on notifications so we can meet again, especially on the cold nights, when a small flame can warm a whole soul. May God bless you and your family. May He keep you safe in every storm, steady your steps on every road, and place gentle miracles at your door. So when the moment comes, you'll have the courage to step out and do the right thing. Amen.